I have 2:30. Is Commissioner Davis? Does it look, Jacob, like he's trying to connect in?
Doesn't look like any action. Let me
See his name up there.
Yeah, we'll give him a call real quick.
Okay.
I was checking for messages. I don't see any from him. To me, anyway.
Okay, well, it is 2:30, and I'm not sure how long this is going to take us. I think we'll go ahead and get started. And I'm not sure who's taking the lead on this. Is it Miss Tasker or
I think it's Debbie Pack. Debbie and
or
Mark
Miss Pack? Okay.
I'll turn it over to Debbie.
Okay. Jacob's going to let me share my screen here in a minute, but I'll go ahead and get started until he does that because he's working on Commissioner Davis. Today's study session is an annual study session that we do, looking at the analysis and trying to get a consensus from you all as far as where you want to set our water rates for next year. As you recall, we look at the next 5 years, but really the only one that we're tied to real is 2021. We can come back next year and change anything from 2022 to 2025. What we'll be looking at today is we'll look at our future capital needs for this fund. We'll look at some of the assumptions that we're making that we know are going to be costs and how we're going to project those costs. We'll look at the analysis format, the spreadsheet that was created for us several years ago, and how we apply information into that. We'll look at the fund balances in both the operating and the capital reserve fund. We'll look at how to read your bill, understanding what goes into that bill, because it's just not water rates that go into your bill, so it's important to understand that. We'll look at what the current rates are, what our proposed 2021 rates are, and how we compare to other entities that provide water and wastewater to their constituents. Yep. He's got me able to do that now. So the first thing we want to look at is kind of what we're anticipating. Can you all see that, or are you covered up with your picture?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. There's still a couple of big projects that are kind of unknown to us at this point, so we want to make sure to keep them in the back of our mind as we go forward and set rates. Because the one thing that we're very cognizant about is not getting to a point where we have to raise rates a lot so that we avoid rate shock. So the two projects right now that we're kind of still keeping in the back of our mind, but not really, we don't really know what they're going to be, is the Schilling water remediation. As you may recall, that original project was estimated about $110 million. The city went through mediation with the Department of Justice, and they kind of settled on a revised number of $67 million that was going to be funded by DOJ. The parties came back and kind of re-engineered the project and believed that they could come into that project with that $67 million and complete what KDHE was requiring over us. As part of that agreement, however, any overages of that project are going to be need to pay by the Salina entities. And at this point, the two entities that are kind of in the mix of things are the City of Salina and Salina Airport Authority. We had originally said that we thought the city's portion might be about $10 million, and if Salina Airport Authority shared that with us 50-50, it'd be about $5 million. So that's still kind of the number that we're putting out there. Until we bid this project and really get some final specifications this spring, we won't know what that number is. So we still want to keep it out there on the horizon and keep it, in the back of our mind. What we have done with this number, just to make sure that it doesn't get lost, is we've included into these budgeted assumptions as if we were going to debt finance that $5 million after we began the project, which is, I think we began 2023 with the first debt service payment on that in our assumptions.
Ms. Pack, if I could just ask really quickly, so the $5 million that we budgeted doesn't represent any kind of an anticipation that it's going to cost us significantly more than $67 million, and it doesn't represent like, you know, ongoing monitoring costs or anything. That's just a placeholder just in case the estimates come in over 67 million.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. It's just a number pulled out of the air.
Okay.
This is Mike. I would add one thing to that, and that over the life of the project, in addition to costs coming in, if there's contamination, additional contamination identified, whether it's a type of contaminant by regulation or a location that's identified, that could represent an added cost above and beyond just bids coming in over budget.
Here and see Mike now. Yeah.
The other capital project or capital cost that we anticipate needing is, as we went into the wastewater plant upgrade, utilities has been deferring maintenance on replacing equipment because they really weren't sure once they got into the project what form of the project was going to take. So, for example, if we decided that we could meet the needs, the requirements, and we needed a type A system, osmosis or whatever, Martha could tell me exactly what they mean, but let's say osmosis, we would need particular equipment for that, but we may not need it for another type of system because we no longer have that. So Martha's always continued to assume that once we know what that system at the wastewater plant is, there will be equipment replacements that will need to happen. And these are not part of the actual system, but they're actually equipment outside of what the upgrade of the system is.
And just to add to that a little bit, to clarify, the wastewater treatment plant project is improvements in response to the NPDES permit requirements that are imposed, but it is not a full renovation and rehabilitation of the wastewater treatment plant. So the number that Debbie's referring to is a little bit of deferred maintenance that we've deferred intentionally, knowing that we need to wait and see what the treatment requirements were, and then just kind of the ongoing repair and replacement of things above and beyond what the wastewater plant upgrade project identifies.
Mayor Hoppick here. If we were to do that, Ms. Pack, what year would that approximately take place?
What we're looking at is possibly doing this out of the reserve. So we're anticipating that would be, I think, in 2 years. And we'll have that later in the slides, okay, where we anticipate possibly taking that out of that capital reserve fund. Can't remember what year it is off the top of my head. It's in here somewhere.
It looked like Commissioner Davis was online.
Yep.
Just to confirm, it looked to me like Commissioner Davis is now online.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm connected.
Okay, great.
The other big project that the utility continues to work on is that water line improvement project. It's had a long history so far. We just wanted to kind of show you on this slide kind of where we started. We had about 195 miles of pipe that needs to be replaced. We still have about 157 miles to go. We've been doing this over the past 10 years, and we've been financing a majority of it. We have paid part of it out of cash, but we've financed the majority of that. And our goal was originally to finance about $20 million and then start paying for that out of cash. So what you'll see in the numbers is that in 2021, we're going to be budgeting about $2 million a year to kind of still continue to work on this process and continue to work on this project to get those water line, cast iron water lines replaced.
I just had a really quick question about that slide, if I could, and I don't know if it's a question for Ms. Pack or Ms. Tasker, but just to confirm, at this rate, it'll take us about 48 years to complete our water line improvements. Am I reading that correctly?
This is Martha, and yes, you are. If we replace every mile of them, we have found a few miles that are outside of the that 1955, 1965 age that are not in as poor a condition in some of the larger sizes. So possibly less years, but for this calculation, we looked at the entire mileage that's left to be completed.
Now, and just to follow up on that, Ms. Tasker, every year we're adding more water lines, obviously with new subdivisions. So do we build that into our calculations that, you know, say in 25 or 30 or 50 years or whatever, that those are going to need some degree of service or upgrade?
The new water mains that we're installing are not the old cast iron pipe. They
Right.
disappeared in the 60s,
So the
early 70s to ductile iron pipe and then ultimately PVC. So those have they call it a 60 to 80 year life. So we're several years on past this this round of replacing cast iron pipes before we'd be back in the business of looking at the other pipes. These pipes have been in the ground 100+ years, some of them.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. So what we're adding now is something that we probably won't have to take a look at for another 60 to 80 years.
And potentially 100 if it pans out to be as good as the materials we've used for some of the other piping. So, but when you look at design standards, they talk of some mention 60, some mention 80. So you're in that life range there.
Okay. Thank you.
So those were the capital assumptions that we've got into the analysis. This one shows that basically we're assuming a 3% increase in personnel each year, 5% in benefits, 3% in supplies and services. We're not anticipating increasing our capital expenditures in the operating fund through this assumption. The projects that we have assumed in this are the South Wellfield at a cost of about $2 million a year. That's debt financed. We do have debt on the 20 million of water line improvements of about $1.5 million a year. We have a water line or a Markley Magnolia about $182,000 a year, and wastewater plant improvement about $1.8 million. And if we left groundwater remediation, this is where we're showing about $370,000 in these assumptions for that. The other assumptions that we have to look at are how many users do we have and how much water and wastewater are they actually using. So our statistics are showing that the average increase or decrease over the last 10 years has been about 35 or 1.28%. However, we know that we're kind of plateauing on our users. So we're only assuming a 0.01% assumption in growth on residential customers. So and that may change. It depends on the building and residential properties and things like that. I think that's why we're seeing a little bit more number of increases in 2019, but we're not assuming a great increase in residential users and accounts. So we're being pretty conservative on that number. The other numbers we look at are consumption. Over the last 10 years, our average consumption of water is about 1.78 million gallons. On sewer, it's about 1.375. So in our estimates, we're using $1,750,000 as our estimate of usage going forward. And for sewer, we're using about $1,350,000 or gallons on the sewer side. Because as you remember, the rates are different for each of those. There's a water rate and there's a sewer rate. So as we go forward and we assume how much revenue we're going to have in the future, we need to know what we think the usage is going to be for both of those.
Ms. Pack, I believe those numbers are in thousands, so it's actually 1.75 billion gallons.
Yes, that's true.
Okay.
That's true.
Okay.
And so this gets into the detail of the spreadsheet that we look at to kind of look at where we are, where we've been. So we look at 2019 and all the prior years' actual expenditures and revenues. We look at the current year budget. We look at the budget that we've just adopted, and then we take the budget that we just adopted and we apply those percentages that I talked about a minute ago to project out the next 4 years. So this just goes by the detail, every detail of every division of utility department. And then as we get further down in the information, we look at what the debt service is for those years. We pretty much have those in accurate amounts because we have amortization schedules for anything that we have actually issued debt for. The items highlighted in yellow here are debt that has not been issued yet. So this is anticipated debt in the future based on the projects that we have in the assumptions. The other one I highlighted in here just to point it out was that in 2021, this is a change to our prior years. We are budgeting that $2 million for water line replacement, that project. So you'll see that $2 million go out, coming out of operating expenses going forward from 2021.
If you could back up a screen, you have wastewater plant improvements there. Where's the South Water Plant?
The South Water Plant is in the already funded. It's here. Oops, sorry. It is on. It's up here. So there's the water plant at 32.
And that's the South Water Plant, not the South Wellfield. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty critical if that got left off.
Yes, it would. And then after we figure out what we think our expenditures are going to be, we actually use those estimates and the revenues from below to calculate what we believe our revenues are going to be. So we can budget these numbers, but as we go into the projections, this number actually comes from that 1.35 billion gallons of water and that 1.75 billion gallons of sewer, or whatever those numbers are. It applies the rate that we've applied here, and it tells us what we expect that revenue to be. So that it gives us a pretty good number as far as where we're setting our rates and how it's going to apply to the expenses. The next thing we show in here, which we'll go look at detail a little bit farther in one of the next slides, is the cash balance. But one of the things that Martha and I look at specifically in this table is this green line. And what that green line tells us is how many days of funding do we have for the operating account. And our goal has always been about 180 days, which is 6 months worth of funding, worth of expenses in that fund. So if we shut down today, we'd have about 6 months worth of expenses in that fund to make sure we're carrying forward. And that's a number that we've looked at. There's not a lot of detail as far as industry standard, but that's the number that a lot of people are using out there for that standard. So that's really what we look at as far as, and as well as the fund balance. So those are kind of the two numbers we kind of keep our eye on. So then we wanted to look at, because we know that fund balance, and this has historically been, how come that fund has so much money? It's building up. We've got to get rid. We don't want to raise rates if we have that much money. So I wanted to give you kind of a perspective of historical information on what that fund's done. Back in 2013, you can see that the fund had about $9 million. At that point, we spent about $5 million on system enhancements, and we transferred about $3 million to the reserve fund, bringing that fund balance down to 3.5. And every year since then, we've kind of been building on that fund. The other thing that's changed in this picture is the target balance. Right now, it's currently at about 25% of our annual expenses at $5 million. And as we go forward with these numbers, this assumes the 2% rate increase for all rates for the next 5 years. So as we look at these numbers, that assumption is already in here. So if we change that number, these numbers will certainly change as we go forward. And I have the spreadsheet that we actually used. This spreadsheet, I have it so that we can look at that live and make any changes or see what happens if we do this. Just look at some scenario things if you so choose to do that. The other thing we wanted to look at was the capital reserve fund, and because it's built its fund balance up too. It started a few years ago and it didn't have hardly anything in it, and then we added it, and so we wanted to look back and see, well, why were we doing that? And because I wasn't here, Martha was here, and she can remember most of it. But so what I did was I went back to the actual blue sheet from 2016 when we did the 2016 rates, which was in 2015. to kind of see, okay, why are we doing this? To see if we're kind of doing what we thought we would do. And so at that point, we were saying, well, we could probably use some on the well field design, the well field improvements, the south well field improvements for 2 years. And then we could probably use some of that on the wastewater treatment design. And we figured that that fund would have about $6.5 million after we got done with all that. In 2018 to 2020, what we've talked about recently is obviously reduction of debt for the water and wastewater plants. We, at those times, did not know what showing groundwater was going to be. So we were really trying to anticipate what that maximum amount would be for that. And we've also started looking at a lot of more economic development projects. So we need to make sure that we have those funds aside when Tony's Pizza comes in and needs a new water system and we need to put in some money down there. We need to make sure that we have that funding available in the water fund or the utility fund so we don't have to debt finance that.
And if I could jump in a second, as far as economic development, when we have large prospects that are looking for a greenfield development site, there's one site in particular that keeps coming up, so much so that Martha's run the design and numbers multiple times. But to accommodate a project like that, the assumption is a pretty sizable water main extension and sewer system extension and lift stations. And so when we say economic development, it would be extension of the utility system to accommodate an economic development prospect.
So these are some of the recent economic development projects that we've actually done and kind of how we paid for them. So we had the South water and sewer water and sanitary sewer that was about $340,000 that came out of operating. We had the downtown sanitary relocation for Homewood Suites that came out of the operating fund. We had the field house, which was a little over $700,000 that came out of reserve. We still have the project, the car museum downtown that's probably going to be about $150,000. And then we've had some other things that I wanted to just show this, that I shared you the slide earlier about what we intended to do. And this slide kind of shows that, yes, we did actually do some of those things, like the South Well Field. In 2016, we put some money into the field house. In 2017, we bought our water rights out of the reserve fund that we bought for the river, for the Lower Smoky Hill Water District. We've paid our EPA fine last year. We've done some easements and things like that. So we have been spending money out of the reserve fund, and some of it is what we actually had intended to do back in 2016. So this is just why I brought this information, just so you could see that we did actually do some of the things that we intended to do.
I'm sorry, Ms. Pat, could we, I couldn't remember what we had dedicated to the car museum out of this fund. Are we making some kind of water line improvements to the car museum?
We have about $150,000. I don't know whether that'll come out of the reserve or out of operating.
Do you know what it's for? Is that?
Yes, it's a water line relocation off the site that they're developing. And so we've looked at 2 alignments, but it looks like the more favorable alignment will be north-south behind the museum. At one point, we're going to have to sleeve the water line underneath the main building that's proposed to be built on the city's parking lot. But I think the plan at the moment is to run north-south and avoid the building altogether. But both, well, that project, the hotel project and the field house project were all relocation of utilities that cut through lots that were being developed.
Okay, I got you. Is that something that came up when their design plans changed, or has that always been something that's been incorporated into the project?
Right, no, it was in the development agreement from the outset.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
So this one just kind of shows us how the capital reserve fund has built up in the past since 2014. As you can see, we've put some money in there over the years. We were putting $2.5 million in there. We only put $250 last year, knowing that fund balance was getting significantly higher. And we do not project, nor have we budgeted to put any money in there from the operating fund from 2021 going forward. So basically that leaves that fund balance at a little over $10 million. And this is where if we so chose, we could use this fund to fund that deferred capital equipment at the wastewater plant of $5 million, which would leave a little over $5 million in this fund for future economic or whatever we wanted to do with that, or whatever direction you gave for that. But I just wanted to kind of show you where this fund has been, how it's got there, and kind of give some options for uses of that fund if we so chose. So that's kind of what I was talking about. We could pay for that equipment. These are just some options. We could retain that money in there for those economic development funds at some level. We don't really have a target fund balance. We could set that and just say, we'll put that money in there from the operating fund, and we'll, once we reach that level, we'll not do that. We could pay any groundwater remediation costs out of there without financing any at all, depending on what that number comes in at. That would save the operating fund analysis about $370,000 a year in debt. We could offset other capital improvements that are coming out of the operating fund to maintain the target fund balance in the operating fund. And just one note is, if as we start to utilize this reserve fund, we may need to reinstitute some sort of annual transfer into the operating fund or into the capital reserve from the operating fund. So I want to make sure that if, for example, we say, let's just pay all this out of there, then we may need to start putting some more money in there to kind of make sure we have that future revenue in there for things that come up or economic development or something like that.
Are you looking for direction from us today?
Yeah, not necessarily on the capital reserve fund. I think we can talk about that when we go through budget in the spring.
Okay.
The direction we'll be looking for from you today specifically is on what the rates should be. If you have a consensus on the capital reserve fund, we can certainly look at that also.
If I might weigh in on the capital reserve fund, a little bit of history, if my recollection is correct, and Ms. Tasker may weigh in. But at some point between 2005 and 2010, we paid off some utility issues and paid them down. And what we did at that time, instead of rolling rates back, we instituted this transfer into capital reserve fund with the intent that that would continue until we built the treatment plants, which we knew were coming at some point down the road at that point. And that was the initial thought behind it. So the fact that we are now ending that transfer isn't really surprising or new. It was kind of in the works from the beginning, because that transfer was intended to help provide support for the two plants as they were built, and obviously we've done some other things with it also. So that's ending the transfer isn't particularly surprising to me. It's kind of was what was in the plan all along.
I gotcha. I was just wondering if, with that in mind, I mean, if it's going to continue to be a fund that we rely on, maybe that's a discussion we have then at budget time about what we think our target balance should be based on what needs we think are going to be placed in it.
I agree.
Okay. So then we take a look at our bill. And once we get through kind of understanding our bill, we'll really get back into, okay, these are the numbers for the rate increases. So every account or user, every residential user has kind of three sections on their bill. They're billed for water. They're billed for a flat fee based on the meter, the size of their meter. They're also billed on what they use, so their consumption, and that's a usage of per 1,000 gallons of water. They're charged a flat fee for their meter on wastewater. They're charged a consumption charge on their wastewater, which for most people that have had a continuous service, that is their average winter quarter from the prior year. For those that are not, that's set in our resolution. Then they're paying for sanitation out of there, so their trash pickup, which is for the 2021 comprehensive fee, that was set at $17 an hour. And they're also paying for the Salina drive-through recycling, which for 2021 was $1.25. So our current rates, this is the resolution that set our current rates. And as we do in the resolution, we kind of say this is what we anticipate our rates to be for the next 5 years. However, really the only one that we use is the current year to do our billings and set our rates, and then we have the opportunity to change the next 5 years. But I just want to provide this so that you can kind of see where we are today and where we're anticipating going in the future. Also, in the resolution that we set the rates, we also set the minimum quarter. So that's for somebody that doesn't have an account or didn't have an account last year, set their sewer fee. That would be their sewer fee. Sets our baseline for excess use charges and other things that will be billed on the system. So then this is the bottom portion of that spreadsheet that's created. And so what we've done is we've anticipated a 2%, sorry, mouse, a 2% increase in both the fixed fee for both water and sewer, and a 2% increase on the usage fee for both water and sewer. So what that does is it takes the 5/8 inch meter from $6.15 a month to $6.27. The wastewater from $8.36 to $8.53. The usage for water goes from $5.31 per 1,000 gallons to $5.42 per 1,000, and the usage for wastewater goes from $5.90 per 1,000 gallons to $6.02 per 1,000 gallons. And this is just kind of tells you this is water and sewer only. It does not include sanitary or sanitation. So basically, what we're saying is if we increase these rates by 2%, then the conservative user of 2,000 gallons of water, 2,000 gallons of sewer would be about a 74-cent increase per year or per month. A typical resident, which uses about 8,000 gallons of water and has about the 6,000 gallon sewer charge, would go up about $1.85 a month. And then the higher residential user would be about $3.36 a month. As a comparison for 8,000 gallons of water at $94.24, which is for sewer and water, that's about a penny per gallon. And that's compared to gas at $1.90 and milk at $2. So water's pretty cheap, even though we don't think it is when we get our bill at the end of the month. The next few slides are really a comparison of how we compare to other cities that are providing sewer and water for their customers. The blue on here is if you're a 5,000 gallon consumption person, and the orange is 10,000 gallons, because some cities charge different rates based on, like, the first 2,000 gallons are at one rate, the next 4,000 are at a different rate. So the rate schedules are very different for each entity. But this kind of just shows you where Salina hits compared to other cities. Now, I will mention that the rates for the other cities are from 2019, because we did not have the 2020 or the new 2021 rates yet. So as you look at where Salina is on this, I would anticipate, because this is our 2021 rate, that our line is going to shift down on the screen based on the increases from other entities. And you can see this a little bit better in this screen. These are the dollars. So this compared to Salina, and for 10,000 gallons, Salina ranks at number 7 for the cost of 10,000 gallons. Now, I will say Martha sent me an article this morning that showed that Lawrence is increasing their water rates for 2021, let me get to my page, by 7.75%. And Manhattan is increasing theirs by 6%. So that's going to change where Lawrence will still be above us, with Manhattan will still be below us, but their rate increases are significantly higher than what we've seen even over the past 5 years. And again, this data is for us is 2021 compared to other cities' 2019 rates. So I would anticipate that the city of Salina will drop below some of these other cities as we get that other data. And this is this is just another schedule of the same thing, but this shows you a little bit better of how different cities charge. So if you go over, like this one, up to $2,000, it's a certain, or 2,000 gallons, it's a certain amount. Above 2,000, it's another amount, or it's a lower amount. So that they've got prorated amounts all over the place. Some of them go up, some of them go down. These go in Coffeyville, the cost per gallon, per 1,000 gallons goes down. In Derby, that cost per 1,000 gallons goes up. So there's a lot of information out there. So it's really hard, I think, to compare ourselves to other people if you don't just calculate what is the cost for the average person. So that's this screen, and I wanted to give you time to discuss that. I also want to bring up that other spreadsheet if I can figure out how, and show you, just so if you chose to have a conversation, we can have a conversation about what those rates are doing. And let me see if I can get this one up.
Well, this is Carl Ryan. I'd like to ask the question is, how does McPherson do their water so cheap? Are they subsidizing that? How I can't understand how one municipal system could be so much different than another.
Martha might be able to answer that. I don't know.
I'm not sure I can. I'm trying to think about McPherson and what type of treatment plant they have. I know that they have well water and they utilize that, but I'm not sure about their extent for their water treatment plant and so on. Here in Salina, we treat both groundwater and river water, so we're running kind of two different systems. Typically with groundwater, it's a little less costly because you don't have the treatment for the surface water. So it's kind of a mixed match, like Debbie was talking about the different costs depending upon the type of treatment they have. But at the end of the day, Carl, I don't know the answer to your question without calling up Tim or someone down there and saying, how do you have why is your water at the rate it is? I truly don't know that answer, other than we just get the rates off of their website.
Yeah.
This
Go ahead, Mayor.
I see where Wichita's is low, but isn't Wichita going through a major water treatment plant addition that might change their rates?
Yes.
Yes, about $500 million worth of water rate improvements, and their rates will be changing.
Yeah.
Over the years. They're using the WIFIA funding, which is a 40-year loan at a low interest rate. So it spreads it out a little bit to try to make it a little more palatable for them. But long term, there's some costs with that, and they forgive payments for the first, 2-3 years. So eventually Wichita will have to build up and have some additional costs for that water treatment. But the funding they're using gives them a little flexibility to kind of slide into it a little easier instead of a large rate shock.
This is Carl Ryan again. Your water estimates for both wastewater and water from the last 5 years are really under the estimate you're using for the projections.
Yes.
You're pretty confident you're going to have $1,750,000 and $1,350,000 when the numbers are below that over the last 5 years?
The average over the past 10 years is higher than those numbers. The actual
Right.
number, as you said, for the last 5 years is below that. So it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
Well, when we instituted the rate increases for additional consumption, that seemed to change people's water usage. I'd say that's more
Yes.
apparent in the last 5 years than using a 10-year average.
Yes.
You know, this is Commissioner Franz. One of the comments I have about this, if you look at, for example, I think it's on page 10, the financial position, it's obvious their balances are declining and going away at the end of that period. But we're also doing this rate projection based on 3 to 5% projections for increases in expenses and 2% increases in rates. And that's kind of a given that you're going to not be in a winning position.
Right.
So I'm I have to question if at some point we're going to we're going to have to bring that 2% number up to try to stabilize us. And the question for me is when does that happen?
Right.
Yeah, this is Mike Sprague. I was going to take us back to that slide as well, calling attention to the note that's on there about the net loss is not sustainable. I think our reserve balances give us an opportunity to kind of have a glide path to some type of balanced approach. And between the operating fund balance and the capital reserve balance, I think we have an opportunity to manage to that. But to your point, Commissioner Franz, that does assume rate increases on a regular basis and shows us at a loss. We, as an organization, not just a water utility, but as an organization, we've said that we want to address things incrementally on an annual basis rather than put things off for an extended amount of time and then have a rate shock with a catch-up rate increase. So what I see us trying to do is kind of balance our rate increases year after year and try to get that to a break even.
Yes, I was coming back to that slide too because I forgot that note. But I think that's something to remember is that we can't sustain a net loss over multiple years. And then also we only go out to 2025 on that projection. And this is the live table here. If you just go to 2026, we're already below and getting significantly below what we anticipate those numbers to be. And we're getting closer. By the time we get to 2027, 2028, we're below our fund balance target.
I guess my point is that we need to be very careful with that, and we need to address that several years in advance of that happening, or it will be out of our control. It's going to be an issue.
Right.
I would like to make one comment about the discussion about our rates versus rates in other communities. That can be a useful comparison, but as Ms. Tasker noted, there are lots and lots of differences in the processes. There's another difference in the degree to which each of those communities maintains their system and how old the system is and how much it needs maintenance. We have been sinking $2 to $4 million into water line replacements for the last 10 years. There are a lot of communities that have not been doing that. And sooner or later, that piper has to be paid. And that's what we talk about when we talk about rate shock. Is it's possible to keep your rates very low for at least some period of time if you're willing to go through the prospect of having 50% increases at some point. That typically is not a good, I don't think is a good management approach. I think it's much better to keep your infrastructure in shape as you go along than it is to, backfill it when it breaks. And that's something we don't know about McPherson or anywhere else without doing a lot of investigation, and even then it becomes difficult to draw comparisons.
And this is Mike Sprague again. I don't know either, but I'm purely speculating. But McPherson does have an electric utility, which in a lot of communities that is a cash generator that they can use to subsidize other operations. So they may be using the electric utility to supplement the water utility. But again, that is purely speculation on my part. I don't know.
Is the electric utility still managed by the BPU, and is the water managed by the same agency, or is water and sewer done by the city and electric and gas by the BPU?
I do not know.
Because they're different entities. I have it in the back of my head that somebody told me at some point that their water system is with their electric and gas with the Board of Public Utilities, and the sewer system is with the city. And I don't know that that is necessarily true.
Commissioner Hodges here. Are we open for some general questions at this point? Or am I jumping in too soon? Okay. Well, I just wanted to, what Commissioner Franz said about McPherson having their utilities together and one utility may being able to, somewhat subsidize another. And I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting that, Commissioner France, but I had emailed staff about, in the last Kansas Government Journal, there was an article on Dodge City's Warrior project. It's a biogas reclamation system that they've incorporated into their wastewater treatment plant. And I understand that Dodge City's a very different community than we are. But since we are looking at wastewater treatment plant design, I was wondering, one, if that's something we considered, because for Dodge City, that nets them about $5 million a year. And, as we're talking about the, some of our funds, not being able to be sustained, I just thought that it might be worth our time to at least consider whether or not we would be a candidate for a biogas reclamation facility within our wastewater treatment plant.
Mike, do you want, I was going to talk about that a little more when I had HDR and Black and Beach on. I thought might come up under a wastewater side, but I can talk in general to it.
And Ms. Tasker, that's fine. I can wait and do it then. It just, I need to get the question out when I think about it. Otherwise, the moment passes and I forget about it.
And I can give you the basic details now. And if we need more, we can ask them if they're working on specific projects. I've been out of the hopper of designing these kind of facilities for 17, 18 years. So I'm going back in some memory and double checked a few things with them. But out at Dodge City, they have a really large non-discharging anaerobic lagoon system. And a lot of their flow comes from beef processing or cattle processing. And from the municipal. So in general terms, trying to think how to describe the difference in the wastewater flow, but the wastewater from the cattle processing is a much higher strength. As an example, I just looked at some in standard cubic feet per minute of what you might produce at Dodge City. They may be producing 1,100 cubic feet per minute of biogas. And there was a facility up, I think it was in Lincoln, Nebraska, that had about 22 million gallons a day. They thought they'd produce about 240 SCFM or cubic feet per minute. And we're at about 4 MGD. So if we just bring that down from there in standard municipal wastewater, which is basically what we have without the high strength flow from the beef packing plants, we're looking at, we might produce 40 SCFM a day and they're producing 1,100. So that's quite a difference. It's just extra strength. And what you see, some of the larger communities do produce and save their gas. For us, we capture the methane and use it in our heating our digesters for the treatment of the biosolids. We do have some that we do need to flare because it's excess. And so in general, there is some that is not utilized, and it could be typically what you see that for these smaller facilities is you might capture that and use it in a fleet of vehicles.
Okay.
That's what you kind of see for the smaller uses. So that's kind of the broad brush description of that. And I think HDR and Jessica will be on, as their company was doing some of the work up at, I think it's up in Nebraska, on a facility, and might have some more input.
Okay, that's very
that's
helpful.
The general
in terms
range
of looking at the different biosolids that each community produces. Yeah. We just don't have.
We don't have the same strength of wastewater due to their 6,000. I think they produce about 6,000 cows a day, or slaughter in their facilities down there. So the wastewater from that is truly way different. And they have, I think it's like 170 or 180 acres of lagoons. It's a very interesting project that, 15 years ago, we were all fascinated by it and following it and watching it, but some of that memories went away. But I knew they did one thing they found is it did have a little bit of odor. So then it became important to cover part of it. Then you had to do something once you covered it. So over the course of the last 15 years, they came up with a very creative solution that's definitely paying off for them. I think their facility cost about $11 million to process the biogas. So definitely, they have the right wastewater stream to make it work. If that helps, Commissioner Hodges.
That helps a lot. Thank you very much, Ms. Tasker.
And that's the short story. So there is a lot I could tell you, but I'm trying to
And I
shorten it up.
appreciate all the euphemism use. I mean, biosolids sounds a lot better than what I was thinking. So at any rate, thank
It's
you.
almost what I said too. So I was being very careful.
And then the other question I had was completely unrelated. Is I know that we had suspended terminating water accounts, and that created quite a backlog of accounts in arrears and a pretty high balance there. And I just was wondering how is that balance of accounts in arrears doing? Have we lost water accounts as a result of people not being able to bring their accounts current? What's the status of that?
Well, I forwarded those questions on to the staff down in water customer accounting.
Okay.
And as you may or may not recall, we had over 2,700 accounts back at the first part of October when we were looking at this information.
Yeah.
Today we only have about 328 delinquent accounts. It took about 4 to 6 weeks for us to process through shutting off, getting people back on, getting through that really large group, which was pretty amazing from our perspective. During that process, what I'm being told is we had about 1,500 accounts that we actually shut off. Of those, 150 remain shut off and have been terminated. They were able to collect over $469,000 from those balances. We did get some funding from Catholic Charities and from Salvation Army, but we're pretty much today back on a normal schedule as we would be any other time without pandemic. Because normally we run about 300 to 400 delinquent accounts at a time.
Do we have any sense what happened to those? I wasn't sure if you said 115 or 150 accounts that have remained off. I mean, are those places where people are living? I understand that it may not be incumbent upon us, specifically the water department, following up, but I just wondered if we had any sense of, the 150 accounts that had not been restored.
I did not get that information. All I got was that those had been terminated, which means there's no water available to them at this point.
Right.
But I was not able to get that information as far as some demographics or anything like that. I'm not sure if they would have that available. We could look.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. That's all I have.
Any other commissioners have questions or comments?
Commissioner Franz, to your point on McPherson, I did look that point up, and this is Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood. The BPU does handle water and electric in McPherson, and the wastewater is handled by the city. So as you had said it, that is correct.
Okay, Ms. Pack, is there any direction you need from us today, or?
I need, what'll happen now is if you can give me the direction as far as if you agree with the recommendation of 2% per year for the next 5 years, we will be bringing this back to you for action next week. Due to the late timing in the year, these rates won't go into effect until February 1st. Because we really need to give water customer accounting the opportunity to be able to get the new rates implemented and things like that. So that would be the direction I would need from you, is kind of a consensus about where you want to land on the rate increases or not.
Okay. Comments from commissioners?
I'm fine with it.
My preference would be that we can do the 2% for maybe 2 years, but then we start edging it up to match the decline in our cash balances to see if we can get a little better match to expenditures. I think if we go 5 years, we're going to be in a circumstance where we may have to do more than we want to do at that point. Of course, this gets adjusted every year, so every year we get to look at it anew.
Yeah, that was my question. This is just a forecast. Would we be better off following Commissioner Fran's suggestion and doing a 2 or 3 year to kind of just keep ourselves abreast of that?
This is Mike Scragg. I think if we get through the process of bidding out the showing groundwater contamination, we'll have a much better sense 12 months from now, or even as we take this conversation up again about what those bids look like, what that does to some of the reserve balances, and then we'll have an opportunity to kind of plan those out years a little bit more, if that's helpful.
Because right now, this Mayor Hoppick, we have 5 of what do we have? 5 of our 10 million kind of earmarked for that, which we may or may not need. Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Which would give us more flexibility if we didn't have to. So.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I agree with Commissioner Franz that we can fine tune this to create a glide path that gets us where we want to be. But I think we may know more in the next 6 months or so.
No, I think 2% is reasonable at this time. But I do have concerns about the water accounts that have been terminated and not turned back on. And I know that that's a completely unrelated to the rate increase, and I don't know if there's any way to follow up on that. But if we have 100 residents in Salina that are living in homes without water, I think that we're going to need to figure out and whether that's working with other agencies like the ones that you mentioned, Catholic Charities and the Salvation Army, or looking internally to see what we can do to get that rectified.
This is Deputy City Manager Jacob Wood. We'll take a look into that. A lot of times those customers will, typically we don't just have people living in houses where they turn the water off. Normally we'll see that account has changed hands. It's gone into somebody else's name. We should be able to dig down into some of that data and make sure that we don't have 150 accounts that are just where the water is off, where people are living. I don't think that's probably the case. We just need to look into the data a little bit closer, and we'll get some information back out to you for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Wood.
Commissioner Davis, any comments on the rates?
Well, we have the ability to adjust it every year. If we know it's going up, I guess I would rather leave the 2% on the books, just so there won't be some wishful thinking that 4 years out there won't be any rate increase at all. But we can adjust this every year, so it's as long as we got next year taken care of. I mean, everything after that, it's a projection anyway.
Yes.
So I'm fine with the way it is.
Okay, I'm probably okay with it too. I just think we need to keep up. I agree with Commissioner Franz. We need to keep an eye on that so we don't have at some point that rate shock. So have that balance into the negative. So
one question: if things were changed where we would be facing a very high rate or potential rate increase, is there a list of projects that we would back off from, or is there a priority list? Which project gets trimmed first? Some of these are pretty big items, you just can't trim them, but up the smaller project.
Well, this is Mike Scragg again. I don't know that we've created that list. We have had conversations about, we feel like kind of the big push is getting through our system with the wellfield project, the water plant project, the wastewater plant project, and if we can set aside some money for deferred maintenance at the sewer treatment plant, And then we are being proactive in terms of waterline maintenance and replacement. So, debt financing helps smooth that out some. And if push came to shove, one of the first things that may have to go is fall back to deferred maintenance on the water main replacement plan.
I guess that's about the only one that you could do piecemeal or adjust the schedule. With the other three big ones, I mean, either do them or you don't. Kind of hard to do them halfway.
Yeah, and we're kind of past the point of no return, or we're on
Right.
one and approaching the point of no return pretty quickly on the other.
And the other
And they're also, they're required by either.
Well,
law
yes,
or-
good point.
one's required.
So then if I'm hearing that correctly, we'll come forward next week with a 2% increase to all the rates for the next 5 years, knowing that we will be doing this process over again next year, and just making sure we're keeping our eye out to the future, even beyond those 5 years, to make sure that we're not getting into a situation where that rate needs to be increased more than what we would hope for.
Just if I could ask just a philosophical question that doesn't need to be answered now, but how much does effective water conservation damage these financial projections as far as keeping the bottom line going?
This is Martha, and Debbie, if my memory is wrong, will you help me out? But it seems like for excess use charges, we only see about $650,000 a year that come in from that point of play. So the excess use charges don't add a lot. They're not big numbers in our current revenues.
Okay.
Debbie, am I close? I'm going by memory. Or
Yeah, that's what we estimate, yes.
yes, and I think in the past when we've looked at it, we're in that 550, 600. So it seems to be consistent every year in that range. If that answers your question, Commissioner.
Well, it does. I guess folks have already started working in that regard. I just thought it was going to be a much higher number than
and
that.
probably from a side note, it's when we were back in prior to the water conservation rates, we would have peak days up around 14 million gallons a day. And now currently in the summer months, we fall between 9 and 10 million gallons a day, and more close to 9 unless something unusual happens in filling or cleaning basins. So that kind of gives you an idea of peak days have went from 14 to 9.5 million gallons a day. So the peak has came off of the top, which is helps a lot in wear and tear on our water distribution system and the need of equipment it takes to produce those peak days. So those are all good ways to help with the rates.
I guess all those kids grew up and went to college and moved away. Yeah. Another peak coming in another 3 or 4 years. Huh?
I don't know about that, but but that's kind of if the general term of the numbers that we see currently.
All right, thank you.
Okay, anything further for study session? I guess we should ask if there's any comments from the public.
Oh, no, don't do that. I might have to answer the phone.
I mean, if we're sitting in the room, do you
I don't
see
see anybody. Charles is on there. I only see one other participant.
I don't see anybody from the public at this point. I mean, just the newspaper and Salina Media Connection.
Okay.
We do have a few minutes. I don't know if you want to use that to discuss theoretically what that capital reserve fund might look like. I don't know if 15 minutes is long enough to do that, but would give us some guidance going forward, or we can wait till the budget discussion when we come back in the summer.
Commission, do we have a preference?
Summer.
Summer. I'd like to give it
Summer.
some, I'd like to give it some thought and maybe get, I think there's some good information here about what it's historically been used for, but yeah, I think the summer.
Okay.
We'll do that. Okay, with that, we will, I guess, end the study session and we will be back here. Everybody, if you could be back a little before 4 o'clock.
All right.
But should we just stay connected?
Just stay connected. I'm not gonna turn the meeting off. I'll mute everybody. If you want to cover your cameras, you can do that, but we'll have everything back up and running just before the regular meeting starts. So this is all going to stay the same. I'm just going to mute you, and you can cover up.
Can we stop our video
Yes, you can.
and restart it?
If you want to log out, you can log back in.
As opposed to covering the camera,
That worked. You just
All right.
have to sit there though.
Yeah.
Thanks. See you shortly.